Before you start a game of Mayhem 3, you first have to generate the map you play on. That's right, Mayhem 3 has a map generator, and you can specify all sorts of parameters to change it to how you like. And it's going to be different for each playthrough of Mayhem 3 you do. So what we're looking at here is the Mayhem 3 map generator tool. You're going to use this to launch the game every time you want to change the map. You can use the standard X3AP executable once you've already run it through the launcher at least once, and only if you're going to keep playing on the same map. Obviously you can't load a save game on one map into another map because the game only has one map loaded at a time. The way to do that is you switch your maps right here and then you hit run at the bottom. So let's go over what we're looking at right here real quick. So this is a preview of the map that we generated, and I'll have gameplay footage right here. This is what it actually looks like in game. So I actually started in the top left corner in my game, and it was originally a boron sector because I started boron, although looking at it in game it eventually got taken over by argon. So what you're looking at here is only the starting, how the map starts out. It's the initial state of the map. Because the mod is called Mayhem, this map is going to be rapidly changing and evolving. And eventually, all these unknown sectors, which are gray, are going to be taken over by the player or other factions as well. The dark black is just empty space. So with that being said, what do all these options do? Well, at the top right here, these are pretty standard. I don't let Mayhem handle my save games because I always do it manually. But the first step in generating a new map is to enter a name. So because this is version 3.4, I'm going to call it 3.4 game. And I will use this to start a new game. And the width and height right here, this is the width and height of the entire map. If we do a very small map like this and hit generate, well, first of all, because it's a tiny map, it's going to ask us if we want extra sector stats. Basically, that means each sector can handle more stations and provide more resources than on a standard map. And you can put that on a big map, but it recommends you do it on a small map because you'll need that many resources anyway. But what we have is we've generated a tiny map, and we can play the game on this map just fine. The game will probably be a lot shorter because there's less to conquer and less to work with. But if you really have performance issues, I suppose you can go with that. But what I typically do is I play on the largest size map. So I'm going to hit delete and generate a new one again. So you can play on a wide map, a tall map. This is the largest standard map. So what this is a standard map, meaning it has enclaves. Like you see these little Talati sectors right here in the middle of nowhere. These are going to be enclaves, meaning they're just random Talati sectors. They're quickly going to get gobbled up by the other factions next to them. And we can turn that off with limited enclaves. So if we regenerate the map, and I should say regenerate, if I changed nothing and regenerated it, it would have an entirely different layout. So there's many, it's completely random each time. So here, with limited enclaves, that makes the territories much more cohesive. You don't have these tiny little specks of random territory everywhere. You have these little groups of 2, but those are pretty rare. There's also the hollowed galaxy, and that, if you've ever played Civilization, it's like the inland sea map, just like that. That's an interesting one. It could lead to some very interesting war fronts opening up over time. Let's see, random distribution. So this is basically chaos. If we turn on random distribution, okay, let's turn off enclaves. We'll make it even more chaotic. What random distribution does is it makes it so that the sectors are basically random. You're not going to have these big cohesive chunks of territory for each faction. And when this happens, the beginning of the game, from what I've been told, is absolute chaos. There's going to be tiny skirmishes everywhere, all over the map, and because everyone has borders with everyone, and they're going to just quickly change hands, and eventually established empire territories are going to be forming. Like this top corner might end up being a Paranid area, and then the split might become dominant over here because they have more sectors to start with, and eventually proper borders will be established, but this is going to be a rapidly changing, absolutely chaotic game of Mayhem. And that's also perfectly fine to play on. Let's see, let's delete that. Shattered Galaxy, what this is what it does is it creates a lot more blank space. So see these black areas right here? These are random holes. So this ends up with the sectors kind of forming these snaky corridors with choke points, and there's narrow passages and forks, and sometimes it can be very difficult to reach certain areas because you have all these holes everywhere. And I like this a lot. Like, see this bottom left corner? If the player was able to conquer this sector, you'd have this whole area to yourself, and there's only one way in or out. So Shattered Galaxies have more variation to them. This is my preferred way to do it, because if you don't have all these blank spaces, a Mayhem sector will always connect 4 corners to any adjacent sector. So you'll have 4 gates on each sector unless it's bordering a blank space like this. So if you have a big grid, it can be hard to defend because you have to defend from multiple directions, and very hard to expand too. But you can play with this, and the only other thing is clustered Xenons. If you turn that on and delete it, a standard Mayhem map has Xenon sectors distributed around the unknown sectors. But if you turn this on, the Xenon sectors are going to be clustered in one area. They're all going to be adjacent to each other. Like, see this? We have 2 groups of 3 rather than them dotted around. So what this results in is the Xenon areas are going to be much harder for the Commonwealth factions to pass through, because if they take out one sector, the other ones are going to cause even more problems. And this will also localize the Xenon incursions. So you'll have 3 sectors worth of Xenon ships attacking these local Argon and Talati sectors, and they likely are going to be heavily ravaged and be very dangerous, rather than a few Xenon sectors sending out raids on their own. You have 3 Xenon sectors sending out raids to the exact same area. So that can be another interesting way to play. So the other options right here, alternate soundtrack file, that randomizes the music from a set that you can specify in your files. What Galaxy Expansion is this is how many sectors does everyone start with. If we put it on none, this is going to be a very interesting way to play. It's like starting a new game of Stellaris, actually. So the entire galaxy is empty. Every faction only has 1 sector. And they're going to eventually grow from this and expand and eventually start claiming all the land. However, while this is a very interesting way to play, because you can't predict how the borders are going to develop like this. And actually, like, if you look here, the Boron are probably not going to be able to get off the ground at all because they're going to be ravaged by these Xenon. It'll be very interesting to play like this. But I will say, the economy starts from scratch too. So you as a player, when you start off, you're dependent on the other factions for resources. And their economies are going to be tiny when you first start. And Unknown Space in Mayhem has pirate bases, and it can be quite difficult to traverse if you don't have any resources and you don't have any other ships. So if you're in it for the long game and you're willing to play a very slow early game while you wait for the galaxy to populate, this is a very interesting way to play. But what I typically do is I like to put it on average. This will mean the galaxy will be mostly populated, but there are still going to be some more unknown sector clusters for the player to settle down in, or for other factions to expand into. So the galaxy is pretty populated but not fully populated. And then you can give each race a unfair advantage or unfair disadvantage. So if we say split dominant and boron minority, what this will do is it will make the game start with more split sectors, and it will start with less boron sectors. So there's a lot of purple on the map and not a lot of green. And this is interesting because a faction can completely get wiped out. It's very possible for the Boron to be completely wiped out and be gone for good in this game. And you can ally yourself with the Boron and help them take over the entire galaxy, and you can have the Split be your big enemy. Or you can be allies with the Split, or whatever happens over the course of the game. But I typically put both of these on default, so everyone starts on a even playing field. But if you don't like a certain race, or you want a certain race to be a big bad that takes over the whole galaxy and they'll be your endgame threat, this can be an interesting option. The other options are relations. What these do is dynamic is what it's all on when you check it. Dynamic means wars between two factions can start and stop at random. So that means two factions could be at war, and eventually they sign a peace treaty, and then another war breaks out between more factions, and this happens all the time in Mayhem. If you turn this off, you can set it so that two races are at permanent war. You can make it so that all the races are all at permanent war with each other, unbreakable wars with each other. And you can also make it so that two factions are at permanent peace. And if you do permanent peace, I believe that they actually share their resources. And going into resources, when you have a dominant and minority race, that actually means that if they have less sectors, that means they have less factories, they have less resources, they have less fleets, and the vice versa is also true for a dominant race. So they're actually producing less total ships and have less power. So unless they get lucky and that all their enemies destroy each other, it's very possible for minority races to get wiped out. So keep that in mind. So with that being said, let's see, already generated that. Let's delete that. So I have settings that I like. So I'm going to keep this on shattered. I'm going to turn off clustered Xenons. I'm going to keep all of this as is. And now that I have my settings, I'm going to generate one. And once you like the preview, I'm going to say go ahead and delete it. Turn off Show Galaxy Preview. Hit Generate. So it's going to make a new one with the same settings. And here we go, 3.4 game. I don't know what it looks like. And I recommend not spoiling it for yourself, because if you look at the map and be like, oh, there's a unknown sector cluster in the top left that has no Xenons and it's a perfect place to settle down, it kind of ruins the whole point of this map generator, and that's making it so that you have to explore an unknown map for the first time. Exploration is actually part of the game, because in LU and those other mods, everyone knows the map by heart already, right? There's no point in exploring. Here, if I were to hop into this, I have no idea what's going to be where. I have no idea where I start. And that's part of the fun of the early game in Mayhem. So anyway, you'll see here that I have current on here. So when you want to switch what map you're playing in Mayhem, you need to use this launcher, select one, and hit run. So to actually load the game with this, we need to hit run 3 for game, and then we will be in the game. And if we want to load a save game that has this map, we have to switch it back in this launcher again. So I'm going to hit go ahead and run. And once we do that, we should be in the game, and we should have a new map to explore, and it will be ready to go.